Art of Fighting isn't the most wildly celebrated of SNK franchises. And you know, I can't really blame anyone for not being blown away by these games. They're pretty not great, but there's a reason for this, I think. Art of Fighting was the testing grounds for so many of SNK's experiments. They used these games to figure shit out about this emerging new genre, what was good, what worked, what didn't work, what really didn't fucking work. See, I don't think that series like Fatal Fury or King of Fighters would be as refined and fun to play as they are if Art of Fighting wasn't around to walk while they could run, so to speak. I mean, think about it. I outlined this briefly in my Rio fanwank video, but Art of Fighting introduced so many concepts and mechanics that would end up being staples to fighting games still to this day. Taunts, supers, character damage, blah blah blah. Go watch this shit because I cannot be fucked to talk about the same shit again. In this video I want to touch upon a game that a lot of people don't even realise exists. Art of Fighting 3. Released in 1996, I was originally under the impression that it was SNK finally getting AOF right, but upon playing it I realised this game is just another test subject for those sick sons of bitches. AOF 3 is boasting so many different features and nuances just on the flyer alone. NDS, the man doesn't lie. This game uses motion capture and rotoscoped animation to make some extremely clean and detailed sprite art. The animations are so buttery smooth, I think it's one of the best looking SNK games of them all. And the backgrounds, man, the backgrounds. Look at this shit. There's nothing to say, just look at them. This game, to my knowledge, is also the first game to introduce SNK's more saturated and cartoony late 90s style, which would later be expanded on and exaggerated in the Real Bout Fatal Fury games. And I fucking adore how those games look. Another AOF first, at least to the extent of my knowledge, is that this was the first fighting game in an established series to throw its entire roster bar one or two characters in the fucking trash, and make an entirely new cast in their place. This is obviously a tradition that Fatal Fury and Street Fighter would later practice with Garo Mark of the Wolves and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. And the music sounds like Mario Kart DS. Okay, nah, I'm just kidding. Well, I'm not kidding. It does genuinely remind me of Mario Kart DS. Music has never really been one of AOF's stronger points, and I still think that AOF 2 has it beaten with Diet alone, but some of the tracks are growing on me. I will say, however, that the ending theme alone makes up for the entire OST being lackluster. That shit slaps. It's gonna be the outro for this video, so look forward to it. Okay, so the game is pretty as fuck. And this is what led me to the impression that they'd also perfected the gameplay of an AOF game. However, this isn't totally the case. The game plays relatively smoothly, and most importantly I can actually play it, unlike Art of Fighting 2. However, it's not exactly the same. See, Art of Fighting 3 was released when 2D fighters were seen as obsolete compared to newer 3D fighters like Virtua Fighter and Tekken. In order to try and capitalize on the attention these games were getting, SNK made AOF 3 play like a 3D fighter, but in 2D. What this basically entails is that the game has a huge focus on rush combos, knockdowns, and sidestepping. Special moves and razzing your opponents have taken a major backseat to this new gameplay style. In fact, fights are so fast paced with the two characters constantly gaining on each other that it's hard to even find an opportunity to use special moves with their pretty long start-up times. But I gotta say, I don't really mind when it basically just feels good to unload your rush combo dick onto an annoying opponent. I actually wouldn't mind this mechanic making a comeback in Art of Fighting 4, which is definitely releasing soon for defos. Maybe I should just go play Tekken. However, it's Art of Fighting, so it's not perfect. Compared to games like Real Bout Fatal Fury Special, certain inputs can be finicky and a lot of stuff is unclear, like how some of the mechanics work and that kind of thing. And the desperation moves still don't work. It's weird, sometimes the game feels really fast and fluid, and other times it feels like weirdly sluggish, and oh my god, Sinclair razzed me again, that fucking bitch! So that's the gameplay. It's certainly playable. But what I want to focus on is the fact that this game has a drastically different premise than the first two. Most notably the fact that the main protagonist is not Ryo Sakazaki, but instead his good old pal Robert Garcia. Just look at the idle animation. He knows he's never getting the spotlight again. He's making the most of it. You know, I really wanted to study Robert's character for this video. You know, unearth that kind of crazy lore I did in the Andy one. But there's honestly not a ton you can say about Robert, and a lot of it is really ambiguous. Like, he was born in Italy but grew up in either Glass Hill or Southtown, and he was the childhood friend of Freya Lawrence, who is also friends with Tom Wyler, who are both key players in AOF 3. But he's also somehow childhood friends with Rio, who's in Southtown. So did they all grow up in Italy and then a young Robert moved to America? Did they all grow up in Glass Hill and only Robert left? If none of them lived in Glass Hill, why the fuck is there even the setting for Art of Fighting 3? Fuck it. And this confusion will seamlessly bring me right round to the main meat of this goddamn video. I originally wanted to just give a basic overview of the game, talk about the aspects of it I liked, what I didn't like, achieve missionary position, bam, I'm out of there, render, upload, become famous. But I noticed something while reading summaries of the story on a few different websites. It's all the exact same thing. And on the SNK wiki there's a pretty in-depth story beginning, which seems pretty legit and like something a late 90s SNK would write, but I couldn't find any source for it from where it's translated from. And under this text is the same goddamn story summary I found everywhere else, which contradicts what the alleged official SNK story is saying. So I was like, well, I can't trust any of these summaries. So I did what any normal human being would do and looked at every single character's ending and dialogue throughout the game to try and decipher this enigma, and then it hit me. I am trying to make sense of fucking late 90s SNK dialogue. Well, off to Italy, wherever my old man awaits. Is this next flight to Italy from this gate? Yuri, what are you doing here? Giggle giggle. It's not fair taking a trip to Italy alone. Vacation? Haha. I gotta keep quiet or someone would bother me to take them with me. Don't worry, I have a ticket of my own right here. I prefer the southern islands instead of Italy for our honeymoon. What? Giggle giggle. Ha 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 ha. I am trying to figure out what the fuck is going on in this game, and you fucking idiots are giving me nothing! But I did it. Originally I wanted to give you a deep dive on Robert's personality, but was bummed when I couldn't really find anything that interesting after my initial digging around. Because you know, I like to have the more unique interpretations of the lore of these games to give my videos a bit more value than you'd get out of a wiki article, but Jesus Christ on a bicycle, it doesn't matter. Because I am about to give you a clear and concise summary on Art of Fighting 3's story, and I am a goddamn hero for that, because you will not find this anywhere else. Seriously, I tried. However, the more I researched, the more badly translated story and awkward stilted dialogue I read, the more I realized something. Art of Fighting 3's story gives Robert the satisfying character development I was trying to find. It's just presented in such a strange way with the usual weird fucking SNK jokes that it barely even clicked to me that I was witnessing the progression and conclusion of Robert's character arc. I seriously thought I couldn't give Robert the spotlight he deserved like Rio or Randy, but I got this now. We're gonna go over his entire backstory to see where he starts and how he evolves throughout the series. And FYI, as usual, I'm gonna have to headcanon some of this shit due to the usual subtle contradictions or weirdness happening during the plot, but I'm going to do my best to stay faithful to what is actually happening in the games. Here we go. Born in Italy, Robert Garcia is the only child of Julie and Alberto Garcia, with the latter being a wealthy businessman owning a successful enterprise called the Garcia Foundation. With his moneyed background, Robert drifted through his early childhood without any worry or care. At this time he was friends with Freya Lawrence, the child of a renowned archaeologist, and Tom Wyler, son of scientist Victor Wyler. However, their friendship would be cut short when Robert moved to a Garcia-owned property in Southtown, likely due to his father partnering with an emerging new protection agency in the city. Meanwhile, Freya and Tom were moved to Glass Hill in Mexico, when Freya's father and his partner Victor made a scientific discovery there. In order for Robert and Freya to not forget one another, they gave each other matching pendants. With their goodbyes said, they parted ways. In Southtown, Robert continued to be pampered. At this point though, Alberto would start to push the idea of inheriting the Garcia Foundation onto Robert. However, Robert didn't care for his father's corporate teachings, and instead started to form his own ambitions, including an interest in martial arts after meeting one of Alberto's associates, Takuma Sakazaki, and his timid son Rio. Robert would often sneak away from his mansion and run down to the Kyokugen-ryu dojo in order to spy on Takuma and Ryo's training sessions. One day, Robert was pushed too far by his father and he rebelled, running down once again to the dojo, but instead of secretly spying, he demanded to be taught Kyokugen Ryu by Takuma. Commending his spirit, Takuma agreed to take him on as a pupil alongside Ryo, and they soon became sparring partners and best friends. Unlike the weaker-willed Ryo, Robert was dedicated to his training and naturally picked up the art of fighting a lot quicker and easier than Ryo, who was always stumbling behind him. Takuma, impressed by Robert, would harshly push Ryo harder despite his reluctance. However, one day Ryo's mother died in a car accident and Takuma completely vanished. Ryo was then forced to look after himself and his younger sister Yuri. Robert remained Ryo's friend in this period, doing what he could to help the struggling young man support himself. Robert continued training, but without the teachings of Takuma, he had no choice but to study under other martial arts practitioners. He mastered various types of karate, but remained dedicated to the Kyokugen Ryu style. His proficiency eventually led him to develop his own style and flair to his fighting techniques. Ryo and Robert would continue to spar together and become well known in Southtown as extremely strong fighters despite their relative youth, with Robert even gaining the nickname the Raging Tiger, with Ryo receiving the Invincible Dragon. It should be noted that Robert begins to develop romantic feelings for Yuri during this time. Eventually the events of Art of Fighting 1 and 2 happen, but since they are heavily focused on Ryo, I won't go into detail here. Yuri goes missing, Ryo and Robert tear up Southtown like nothing else to find her, eventually do Takuma reveal that wasn't totally obvious, end credits. After the events of AOF 1 and during the events of AOF 2, Robert's feelings for Yuri become mutual and the two begin dating. However, they still tease the fuck out of each other, I think. I mean, what the fuck is even going on here? Meanwhile, during the events of the first two AOF games, Freya's father and Victor continued to research a discovery they made in South America. They had managed to synthesize a powerful elixir that could dramatically enhance a human's abilities. However, Freya's father realized the danger of the elixir and disbanded the partnership between him and Wyler, fleeing Glass Hill with the last of the data needed to finish the elixir and hiked up to America. Sometime after this, he dies of unknown causes and entrusts the data needed to complete the elixir to Freya. Victor, disheartened after years of research got wasted, became destitute and eventually died as well. His son Tom Wyler blamed his death on the partnership being disbanded and sought out Freya in order to complete his father's work. Anyway, this leads into the events of AOF 3, and this is where I get kind of stuck, because it's not really clear what sets this game into motion. In some accounts, Robert is on his way to a date with Yuri and coincidentally meets up with Freya in Southtown wherein they make the plan to go to Glass Hill. But if Freya is trying to keep the data away from Wyler, who is in Glass Hill, why do they go to Glass Hill? In some versions, Freya wants to go to Glass Hill to give Wyler the elixir because apparently her father regretted his decision, and it was his final wish to complete the elixir. But if that's the case, why is Freya still in Southtown? Can the daughter of a rich scientist not fund a flight to Mexico? If she's willing to give Wyler the elixir, then why is she wanted in Glass Hill? Is Robert literally just there with her to make sure she doesn't get murked? There's no way that Glass Hill is more dangerous than Southtown. In some versions, Freya never left Glass Hill, so why does Robert just up and vanish, going to Glass Hill without telling anyone to randomly look for his old childhood friend? Maybe he just got sick of Yuri's pussy. And you may be wondering, why am I so obsessed with making sense of the plot for an obscure late 90s arcade title? Well, why are you so obsessed with dumb shit like getting a job, losing your virginity, and getting married and having children? Miss me with that case shit. I don't want to live a normal life. I want to understand the deep Robert Garcia lore. Look, let's just say, for the sake of my sanity, Wyler doesn't know that Freya isn't in Glass Hill anymore and sends out Rhodey Burtz along with Lenny Creston to go find her. While he, browses biz. Freya, on her way to fulfill her father's wish, coincidentally runs into Robert on her way to Southtown Airport to go to Glass Hill and fills him in on everything. Perhaps feeling nostalgia for his past, he agrees to tag along to protect Freya and see that everything goes down smoothly. There. Now that they're in Glass Hill, they begin to make their way to Wyler's mansion, but get sidetracked by Rhodey. Robert beats his ass, but during the fight he loses sight of Freya. She's been abducted by Rhodey's partner Lenny to be taken to Wyler. Robert rushes to Wyler's mansion, but all he finds is Sinclair, Wyler's personal bodyguard. After a brief scuffle, she tells Robert that the elixir he's trying to make is dangerous and to head for the town's cemetery to find him. Once Robert makes it there, he finds Freya with Wyler, who has already taken the data from her to complete the elixir. With his goal complete, Robert demands Wyler let Freya go home and to call off his searches for her. However, Wyler is not the same person that Robert remembers from childhood. He's become a megalomaniac since his father's death and no longer cares for the well-being of Robert and Freya, only interested in his own pursuits. He ingests the elixir right in front of both of them, transforming into a hulking brute of superhuman strength. He attacks and wounds Robert, ready to finish him off, but is interrupted by a
Haoh Shokou Ken!
from Yuri. See, Ryo, Yuri, and Carmen Cole, a private agent for the Garcias, traveled to Glass Hill after Robert mysteriously vanished since he forgot to tell anyone where he was going. I'm assuming it's probably Carmen who figured out where Robert went. As a long-term employee for the Garcias, he probably had some intel or just put 2 and 2 together or something. Yuri, blown out by firing off such a strong move, falls to the ground. However, with Wyler staggered, Robert is able to properly challenge him and, despite the odds, is able to match fists with him and eventually edges him out in battle. After his defeat, Wyler's mind is broken, and as a side effect to the elixir, he is reduced to a childlike state of himself, calling out for his father in pain. Freya, feeling sympathy for him, decides to stay in Glass Hill to nurse him back to health. She states that she doesn't want to abandon Wyler like her father had done to Victor. Robert reluctantly accepts her decision, and reflects on what it means to carry on your parents' work. Perhaps catching up with Freya and Wyler and seeing what had become of the latter inspired him to cease his rebellious attitude and to meet his father halfway and inherit the Garcia Foundation like Alberto wanted him to do all those years ago. Instead of going back to Southtown with Ryo and Yuri, he decides to return to Italy and begin negotiations with his father, who returned there years prior. He bids the Sakazakis farewell and prepares to board his flight. Yuri, while glad that Robert isn't running away from his problems anymore, is upset to see him leave because it means their relationship would effectively end. But Ryo surprises her with a ticket on the same plane as Robert. He tells her to go before he changes his mind, and Yuri runs off to meet up with Robert, implying they go to live together in Italy while Robert runs the Garcia Foundation, leaving Ryo to himself in Southtown for the first time ever. Well, apart from King and Takuma. And you know, Terry's grown up now, so maybe they'll meet up, catch a drink. Looking past the shitty English translation, I really like what this ending represents. Ryo, the infamous overprotective brother always cock-blocking Robert, is finally letting Yuri be independent and trusting Robert to take care of her. I think the major theme to Robert and AOF3's story is the idea of continuing your family's legacy. Robert went from a rebellious loudmouth dejecting his father's teachings to a more level-headed adult taking on his responsibilities as a rich twit. Maybe seeing his childhood friends become divided after both of their fathers' deaths inspired him to take his family's prestige more seriously, driving him to take over the Garcia Foundation in order to make his dad proud, realizing that neither of his friends got that same chance. He saw how selfishness poisoned Wyler's mind in his relationship with Freya, and strived to do better than that. While he'll always be the raging tiger, he's risen above his brasher childhood habits and is now kicking ass and stacking paper. Rock on, Robert Garcia. Good god, that was tiring to pull together. I don't know, maybe I was just making it seem overcomplicated by going too in depth, but the tiny little inconsistencies kept piling up until I was totally fucking confused. Like for example, Robert and Freya go into Glass Hill together, and yet for some reason Robert spends the entire game asking where Freya is. Little shit like that just driving me absolutely insane. And I definitely glossed over some details, but if I tried to cram in absolutely everything in this video, it would just get out of hand. All in all, I think this is probably the best summary of AOF 3's story out there. It definitely wasn't perfect, but hey, at the end of the day, neither was Art of Fighting 3.